The silence in St. Matthew's Lutheran Church was deafening. My entire family sat in the third pew, watching as 3 uniformed Marines approached me with precision steps that echoed through the sanctuary. My mother's face had drained of all color. My father's smirk had vanished completely. And my brother Derek? He looked like he'd seen a ghost. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Just 20 minutes earlier, they'd been laughing at me, calling my military service a vacation and my deployment playing soldier. But now, as Sergeant Rodriguez began to speak, every person in that church was about to learn exactly what I'd sacrificed for my country. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Thick cream cardstock with gold-embossed lettering that screamed expensive. Derek Sullivan and Madison Pierce request your presence. I stopped reading there. My younger brother was getting married, and somehow, I was the last person in the family to find out. I called my mother immediately. Mom, Derek's getting married? When were you planning to tell me? Oh, Jessica, she sighed, that familiar tone of disappointment creeping into her voice. We weren't sure if you'd even be able to make it, what with your military thing. My military thing. That's what my family called 4 years of active duty service in the United States Marine Corps. My military thing was 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 18 months in hostile territory, and a Bronze Star medal sitting in a box in my apartment, because I had nobody to show it to. The wedding is in 6 weeks, Mom continued. It's going to be quite the affair. Derek's fiancé's father owns 3 car dealerships, you know. They're having the ceremony at St. Matthew's Lutheran, the big one downtown. Very prestigious. Prestigious. Everything with my family came down to prestige, money, and social standing. When I enlisted right out of high school instead of going to college, they treated it like I'd announced I was joining the circus. I'll be there, I said firmly. Well, that's nice, dear. Just try to dress appropriately. Maybe don't mention the Army stuff too much. Madison's family is very sophisticated. Marines, Mom. I was in the Marines, not the Army. Same difference, sweetheart. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Growing up in the Sullivan household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. My father, Robert Sullivan, was a successful insurance broker who'd built his agency from the ground up. My mother, Patricia, came from old money and never let anyone forget it. Derek was the golden child, star quarterback in high school, business degree from Northwestern, now working his way up at Dad's agency. And then there was me. I was the one who asked too many questions, who got into fights defending kids who were getting bullied, who couldn't sit still in Mrs. Henderson's calculus class because I kept thinking about all the injustice in the world. When my guidance counselor suggested military service, my parents acted like she'd recommended I become a professional criminal. Jessica, honey, Dad had said when I first brought up enlisting, the military is for people who don't have other options. You're smart. You could go to college, get a real career. Why would you want to throw your life away playing soldier? Playing soldier. That phrase would haunt me for years, but I knew what I wanted. I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I wanted to make a difference in the world, not just sit in some corporate office pushing papers and counting money. So despite their protests, their threats to cut off my college fund, which they did anyway, and their general disappointment, I enlisted. Boot camp at Parris Island was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most transformative. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood what duty meant, what sacrifice looked like, what it meant to put others before yourself. My drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Martinez, saw something in me that my own family never had. Sullivan, she told me during my 3rd week, you've got the heart of a warrior. Don't let anyone tell you different. My family visited exactly once during my 4 years of service. When I graduated from advanced combat training and received my military occupational specialty as a combat engineer, I sent them photos. My mother's response was a text message. That's nice, dear. Derek got promoted to regional sales manager. The deployments were where everything changed for me. Afghanistan in 2019 and again in 2021. My job was route clearance, finding and disabling improvised explosive devices before they could hurt American or coalition forces. Every day, I went out knowing that one wrong step, one missed wire, one miscalculation could mean the difference between my squad coming home safe or coming home in boxes. During my second deployment, we were working on a particularly dangerous stretch of road outside Kandahar. Intelligence had reported heavy IED activity in the area, but supply convoys needed to get through. My team had been out there for 6 hours in 115-degree heat, carefully checking every inch of asphalt when Private Chen spotted something. "Sergeant Sullivan, got something here that doesn't look right." I crawled over to his position and saw it immediately. A pressure plate buried just beneath the surface, connected to what looked like a substantial explosive device. This wasn't some amateur hour setup. This was sophisticated, military-grade, and positioned perfectly to take out an entire convoy. The disarmament took 3 hours. 3 hours of pure concentration, sweat dripping into my eyes, hands steady as a surgeon's, while my team maintained a security perimeter. One wrong move and we'd all be going home in flag-draped coffins. When the device was finally safe, when the convoy rolled through without incident, when 17 soldiers made it home to their families that night because of our work, that's when I understood what my service really meant. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about the quiet moments when evil was prevented and lives were saved. I tried to explain this to my family during phone calls home, but they never seemed to understand. "That's great, Jessica," Derek would say, "but when are you going to get a real job? You can't be a soldier forever." "Marine, Derek. I'm a Marine." "Whatever. The point is, you need to think about your future. I mean, what skills are you even learning over there?" Skills. I was learning how to save lives, how to lead under pressure, how to make split-second decisions when failure meant death. I was learning what real courage looked like, what genuine teamwork meant, what it felt like to be part of something greater than yourself. But to them, I was just wasting time. When I finally completed my service and moved back to Chicago, I thought things might be different. I'd earned my bachelor's degree through military education programs, I had job offers from 3 different security firms, and I'd received commendations from commanding officers who called me one of the finest Marines they'd ever served with. Homecoming dinner was at Salvatore's, the same Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every Sullivan family milestone for the past 15 years. Dad ordered champagne, which I thought was a nice gesture until I realized it was actually for Derek's recent promotion, not my return home. "So, Jessica," Madison Pierce had said, she'd been Derek's girlfriend for 2 years by then, "what exactly did you do over there?" Like, on a daily basis. I'd started to explain about route clearance, about the technical expertise required to identify and neutralize explosive devices, about the lives we saved and the strategic importance of keeping supply lines open. "So, basically," Derek interrupted with a laugh, "you were like a really expensive janitor, cleaning up roads." The table erupted in laughter. Even Mom giggled behind her wine glass. That's when I realized that no matter what I'd accomplished, no matter how many lives I'd saved or how much I'd sacrificed, my family would never see my service as anything more than an extended camping trip. The job offers I'd received were good ones. Blackwater wanted me for their explosive ordnance disposal team. A private security firm in D.C. offered me a position training federal agents. Even the Chicago Police Department had reached out about their bomb squad, but I wanted to do something different with my life. During my deployments, I'd met children in Afghan villages who had nothing. No schools, no medical care, no hope for a better future. I'd seen what poverty and desperation could do to families, to communities, to entire generations. So I took a job with a nonprofit organization called Veterans for Community Development. We worked in underserved neighborhoods across Chicago, using military veterans to mentor at-risk youth and provide community services. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover rent on my studio apartment in Humboldt Park, but the work was meaningful. My family's reaction was predictable. "Jessica, sweetheart," Mom had said during our monthly obligatory lunch at the country club, "don't you think it's time to get serious about your career? You're 26 years old. Derek is already making six figures." "I am serious about my career, Mom. I'm helping kids who—" "Playing social worker isn't a career," Dad interrupted. "It's a hobby. When are you going to use your military experience to get a real job? Security consulting pays well. Corporate work has benefits. Real job. As if spending my days working with teenagers who'd lost parents to gang violence, helping families navigate social services, and organizing community cleanup efforts wasn't real work. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The mockery intensified as Derek's wedding approached. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to highlight the contrast between his success and my poor choices. "Derek just closed the biggest deal in the agency's history," Dad announced at Easter dinner. "Madison's engagement ring cost more than Jessica probably makes in 6 months. "Well," Derek added with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate, "at least Jessica got to see the world, even if it was just, desert places where people shoot at each other." Madison giggled. "It must have been like the ultimate camping trip. Did you get to keep any of the gear?" Keep any of the gear. As if my deployment was some kind of military-themed summer camp. But the worst came 2 weeks before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner planning meeting. We were sitting around Mom and Dad's dining room table, going over last-minute details, when Derek brought up the reception seating chart. "So I was thinking," he said, "maybe we put Jessica at table 12, with the other single people. So she doesn't feel out of place." Table 12 was in the back corner, next to the kitchen doors. The table for people they had to invite but didn't really want at the main celebration. "That seems perfect," Madison agreed. "Plus, if any of Jessica's military friends come, they'll be more comfortable back there. More casual. Military friends. None of my fellow Marines lived in Chicago anymore. Most had moved on to careers that actually utilized their skills and experience. But my family didn't know that, because they'd never bothered to ask about my actual life. "Actually," I said, quietly, "I was hoping to bring someone to the wedding." Derek looked up from his planning notebook. "Oh? Finally dating someone? What does he do?" "She," I corrected. "And it's not a date. I wanted to bring Maria Santos. She's a Gold Star mother I work with at the nonprofit. Her son Carlos was killed by an IED in Helmand Province. She doesn't have much family, and I thought—" "Absolutely not," Mom cut me off sharply. "Jessica, this is Derek's special day. We can't have some grieving stranger making everyone uncomfortable." "She's not a stranger, Mom. She's—" "The answer is no," Dad said with finality. "This is a celebration, not a therapy session. Derek and Madison want their wedding to be joyful, not depressing." Depressing. They thought honoring the sacrifice of a fallen Marine and supporting his mother was depressing. That night, I called my old squad leader, now Captain Williams, who was stationed at Camp Pendleton. I needed to talk to someone who understood what service actually meant. "Sullivan," his familiar voice boomed through the phone. "How's civilian life treating you?" "Like I'm invisible, sir. Like nothing I did mattered." "Listen to me, Marine." "What? You did over there what we all did. It mattered. Don't let anyone tell you different. You saved lives. You served with honor. That means something, even if the people around you can't see it." We talked for an hour about leadership, about purpose, about the challenge of transitioning from military service to civilian life when your own family doesn't understand what you've been through. "You know what your problem is, Sullivan?" "Captain," Williams finally said. You're trying to get validation from people who never had the courage to serve. You're looking for approval from people who've never put anything on the line for others. Stop trying to make them understand. Just keep being the Marine you've always been. The week before Derek's wedding, things reached a new low. We were at Dad's agency for their monthly family dinner, a tradition where employees and their families gathered for what Dad called relationship building. But what everyone knew was really just an excuse for him to show off. Derek was holding court near the appetizer table, telling anyone who would listen about his latest sales numbers and the new BMW he'd just leased. Madison was showing off her engagement ring to a group of women who were making appropriately impressed noises. I was standing alone by the window, wearing my best dress, which, admittedly, had come from Target rather than the boutique stores. My family preferred, when I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. "So that's Derek's sister?" one of Dad's business partners was asking. "The one who was in the Army?" "Marines," Dad corrected with visible embarrassment. "And yes, that's Jessica. She's finding herself, going through a phase. A phase. 4 years of military service, 2 combat deployments, and a Bronze Star medal were apparently just a phase." "What's she doing now?" the partner continued. "Some kind of social work," Mom answered dismissively. "We keep hoping she'll grow out of it and do something more substantial. Derek's offered to get her an entry-level position here at the agency." Entry-level. After everything I'd accomplished, after all the responsibility I'd carried, after leading teams in life-or-death situations, they wanted to offer me an entry-level position filing insurance paperwork. But what hurt most was what Derek said next. Funny thing is, Jessica actually thinks she's some kind of hero. Like, she talks about her deployment like it was this huge, important thing, but from what I understand, she basically just drove around looking for bombs. I mean, how hard could that be? Point and click, right? The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Point and click. He thought disarming improvised explosive devices was point and click. I left dinner early that night, driving home through the Chicago streets while trying not to cry. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd accomplished, none of it mattered to the people who were supposed to love me most. The morning of Derek's wedding, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror trying to decide whether to wear my dress blues or the navy cocktail dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The uniform felt right. It represented who I truly was. But I knew it would cause problems. My family had made it crystal clear that my military service was an embarrassment to them. I chose the dress. The phone rang as I was applying lipstick, unknown number with a DC area code. "Is this Staff Sergeant Jessica Sullivan?" "Former Staff Sergeant, yes. Who's calling?" "Ma'am, this is Corporal Hayes from Marine Corps Headquarters. I'm calling regarding Corporal Michael Chen." My blood went cold. Chen had been on my team during both deployments. He was 22 years old from San Francisco and wanted to be a teacher when he got out. He used to show me pictures of his girlfriend and talk about the house they were going to buy. "What? About Chen?" "Ma'am, Corporal Chen was killed yesterday in a training accident at Camp Lejeune. His family has requested that you be notified, and they're hoping you might be able to speak at his memorial service next week." The lipstick tube slipped from my hand and clattered into the sink. Chen was dead. Sweet, brilliant Chen who could disarm any explosive device in half the time it took anyone else. Chen who'd saved my life during a firefight outside Kabul when he spotted a sniper I'd missed completely. Chen who'd nicknamed me Chicago and promised to visit me when we both got back to the States. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "Yes." "Yes, of course I'll speak at his service. Can you send me the details?" "Absolutely." "And ma'am, Corporal Chen's parents specifically asked me to tell you that he talked about you constantly. He said you were the best squad leader he'd ever served under." I hung up and sat on my bathroom floor for 20 minutes, crying for a young man who deserved so much more life than he'd gotten. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. I arrived at 1:30, hoping to find a quiet moment to compose myself before facing my family. The church was stunning. Massive stone architecture with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Madison's family had spared no expense. I found my assigned seat at the back and tried to blend into the background. The church was filling up with Derek's college friends, Dad's business associates, and Madison's extensive social circle. Everyone looked successful, polished, like they belonged in this elegant setting. "Jessica," my cousin Amanda waved from several rows ahead. "Come sit with us. There's room." I made my way forward, grateful for a friendly face. Amanda had always been the rebel of the family. She'd become an artist instead of pursuing the business career everyone expected. "You look beautiful," she whispered as I settled beside her. "How are you holding up?" Before I could answer, the music started. Madison appeared at the back of the church in a dress that probably cost more than my annual salary, flanked by 6 bridesmaids in matching pink gowns. She looked like something out of a fairy tale. Derek waited at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, beaming like he'd won the lottery. Which, considering Madison's family wealth, he probably had. The ceremony was traditional and elegant. Pastor Williams spoke about love, commitment, and building a life together. Madison's vows were about supporting Derek's ambitions and creating the perfect family. Derek's vows were about providing for Madison and making her proud. Nobody mentioned sacrifice. Nobody talked about service to others. Nobody acknowledged that real love sometimes means putting yourself in danger to protect the people you care about. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour before the reception, I found myself standing alone again while extended family members made small talk about golf handicaps and vacation homes. I was checking my phone for details about Chen's memorial when my Uncle Frank approached. "Jessica, there's the family warrior," he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Derek tells me you spent some time playing Army. That must have been quite the adventure." Playing Army, adventure. Words that trivialized everything I'd experienced, everything I'd sacrificed, everything Chen had died for just yesterday. "It was Marines, Uncle Frank, and it was deployment, not adventure." Right. Marines. Very impressive. My buddy's son did something similar after high school. Lasted about 6 months before he realized it wasn't for him. Got into real estate instead. Making a killing now. Making a killing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica was telling us earlier about her current job. Madison's mother, Mrs. Pierce, chimed in. "Working with troubled youth, isn't that right? How charitable." Charitable. The way she said it made it sound like I was volunteering at a pet shelter rather than providing critical services to families in crisis. "Actually," I began, "we work with veterans' families primarily. Gold Star families, homeless veterans, people transitioning back to civilian life. A lot of the families have lost someone in service, so—" "How depressing," interrupted Madison's sister Brittany. "I could never work around all that sadness. It must be so draining, being around people who are always complaining about their problems. Maria Santos wasn't complaining when she told me about finding her son's Purple Heart medal in his personal effects. She was sharing her grief with someone who understood what her son had died for." The conversation continued to spiral. Derek joined the group and immediately steered the discussion toward his recent business successes. Dad appeared with several potential clients, introducing Derek as my younger son, the real go-getter of the family. I wasn't introduced at all. By the time dinner was served, I'd retreated to table 12 as planned. My table mates were a mix of distant relatives and Madison's childhood friends plus ones. People who knew nobody and had nothing in common except their peripheral relationship to the bride and groom. During Derek's toast to Madison, he thanked everyone who'd supported their relationship and helped make their dream wedding possible. He mentioned Dad's business advice, Mom's planning assistance, and Madison's parents' generosity. He talked about building a successful future together and achieving their goals as a team. He never mentioned me, not once, but Madison's father did, during his speech about welcoming Derek into their family. The Pierce family values hard work, dedication, and success, he announced to the crowd. We're thrilled to welcome Derek, who exemplifies all of these qualities. Unlike some people who choose alternative paths in life, his eyes found mine across the room when he said it. The reception continued with dancing, cake cutting, and more champagne toasts. I watched my brother and his new wife celebrate their perfect day surrounded by people who valued them, supported them, and understood their choices. Around 9 o'clock, I decided I'd had enough. I was gathering my purse to leave quietly when Derek appeared at my table. "Leaving already, sis? The party's just getting started." "It's been a long day, Derek. Congratulations, by the way. Madison seems really happy." "She is. We both are." He sat down across from me, loosening his bow tie. "Listen, Jess, I've been thinking. Dad's serious about that entry-level position. You could start Monday. Good salary, benefits, room for advancement. You could finally stop messing around with this nonprofit thing and join the real world." The real world. As if the world I'd been living in, where people died for their beliefs, where sacrifice actually meant something, where service to others wasn't just a tax write-off, wasn't real. "Thanks for the offer, Derek, but I'm happy where I am." "Happy?" He laughed. "Come on, Jess. You're 26, living in a studio apartment working for peanuts. This isn't happiness. This is... I don't know what this is. Stubbornness? It's purpose." "Purpose?" His voice rose slightly. "What purpose? You're not changing the world, Jessica. You're not making a difference. You're just stuck. Stuck in some fantasy about being important." The words hit like a physical blow. Chen's death was still fresh in my mind. Maria Santos was still grieving her son, and here was my brother telling me that none of it mattered. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know that while you were off playing soldier, I was building a real career. I know that while you're wasting time with losers and charity cases, I'm creating actual value in the world. I know that Mom and Dad are embarrassed to tell their friends what you do for a living." Something inside me snapped. "Playing soldier? Derek, I saved lives. Real lives. I disarmed bombs that would have killed American servicemen and innocent civilians. I led teams through hostile territory. I earned commendations for bravery under fire. What have you done? Sold insurance policies? I've built a business. I've made something of myself. I've given Mom and Dad something to be proud of." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "But hey, if you want to keep pretending that your little military adventure was important, go ahead. Just don't expect the rest of us to play along anymore." He walked away, leaving me sitting alone at table 12 while the celebration continued around me. I left without saying goodbye to anyone. I didn't sleep that night. Chen's death, Derek's words, and years of accumulated dismissal swirled through my mind until dawn broke gray and cold over Chicago. I kept replaying Derek's voice. Don't expect the rest of us to play along anymore? Play along with what? The truth? Sunday morning came with an unexpected phone call from Pastor Williams at St. Matthew's. I'd met him briefly during the wedding rehearsal. A soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd served as an army chaplain in Vietnam before entering civilian ministry. "Miss Sullivan? This is Pastor Williams from yesterday's service. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to speak with me this morning." "Is everything all right, Pastor?" "Oh yes, everything's fine. I overheard some conversations yesterday that concerned me. About your military service. I'd like to invite you to our 11 o'clock service this morning if you're available." Something in his tone made me say yes, though I couldn't imagine why he wanted to see me. I arrived at St. Matthew's 30 minutes early and found Pastor Williams waiting in his office. The walls were lined with books and photographs, including several shots of him in army dress uniform from decades past. "Thank you for coming, Jessica. May I call you Jessica?" "Of course. I served 3 tours in Vietnam as a chaplain," he began without preamble. "I've seen what real combat does to people, and I've spent 40 years watching veterans struggle to find their place in a world that doesn't understand what they've been through." He gestured toward a chair across from his desk. "Yesterday, I heard your brother and some guests making light of your service. Comments about playing army and adventures overseas. I've heard similar ignorance before, and it always breaks my heart." I felt my throat tighten. "Pastor, I appreciate your concern, but Jessica, would you be willing to do something for me? For our congregation?" The request was unexpected. Pastor Williams explained that today's service was focused on sacrifice and service to others. He'd planned to speak generally about these themes, but after meeting me, he felt called to do something different. "I'd like to invite you to share your story with our congregation. Not a formal speech, just a conversation. Help people understand what real service looks like." My immediate instinct was to refuse. The last thing I wanted was more attention, more questions, more opportunities for people to diminish what I'd experienced. "Pastor, I don't think that's a good idea. My family will be here for regular service, and they're not really supportive of discussing my military background." "All the more reason to do it," he said gently. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who need to hear the truth most." Something in his voice reminded me of Captain Williams, of Staff Sergeant Martinez, of all the leaders who'd believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. "What would you want me to say?" "Just tell the truth. Tell them about your service, about what you learned, about what it means to put others before yourself. Let them see the person I met yesterday, someone who's dedicated her life to serving others." An hour later, I sat in the front pew of St. Matthew's as the congregation filed in for morning service. My hands were shaking slightly, and I kept second-guessing my decision to accept Pastor Williams's invitation. I spotted my family entering through the main doors: Mom, Dad, Derek, and Madison, all dressed in their Sunday best. They looked surprised to see me already seated up front, but found seats in their usual third-row spot without approaching me. The service began with traditional hymns and readings. Pastor Williams delivered a thoughtful sermon about the parable of the Good Samaritan, focusing on what it truly means to serve others without expecting recognition or reward. I found myself nodding along, thinking about the parallels between biblical service and military service. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Before we close today," Pastor Williams announced to the congregation, "I'd like to invite someone special to share a few words with us. Jessica Sullivan recently completed 4 years of service in the United States Marine Corps, including 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan. She's here today to help us understand what real sacrifice looks like." The sanctuary went completely quiet. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on me as I walked to the pulpit. From my elevated position, I could see my family's faces clearly. Mom looked mortified. Dad appeared confused. Derek's expression was pure horror. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Pastor Williams asked me to talk about service, about sacrifice, about what it means to put others before yourself. I want to tell you about a young Marine named Michael Chen," I told them about Chen's technical brilliance, his gentle humor, his dreams for the future. I explained what explosive ordnance disposal actually entailed, the precision required, the constant danger, the weight of knowing that other people's lives depended on your expertise and courage. "Last Tuesday," I continued, "Chen was killed in a training accident. He was 22 years old. He died preparing to save other people's lives." The silence in the church was profound. People were leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. During my deployments, I worked with Marines like Chen every day. People who volunteered to put themselves in harm's way so that others could be safe. We cleared roads so supply convoys could reach forward operating bases. We disabled bombs so children could walk to school without fear. We risked everything because we believed that service to others was worth any personal cost. I could see Derek shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Madison was whispering something to him, but he wasn't responding. When I came home, I continued serving through civilian work because I learned something overseas that I'll never forget. Your life has meaning when you use it to make other people's lives better. Whether that's in uniform or in civilian clothes, whether it's recognized or ignored, whether it pays well or barely covers rent. The congregation was completely still. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. "I want to read something to you," I said, pulling out my phone. "This is from a letter that Corporal Chen's mother sent me yesterday." The letter had arrived that morning via email, and reading it aloud took every ounce of courage I had. "Dear Jessica, Michael talked about you in every phone call home. He said you taught him that being a Marine wasn't about being tough or proving yourself. It was about being willing to do the hardest job so that other people never had to. He said you showed him what real leadership looked like. Quiet, steady, focused on the mission rather than personal glory. He said serving under you was the honor of his life." My voice broke slightly on the last sentence, but I pushed through. That young man died believing that service to others was the highest calling a person could have. He died knowing that his life had meaning because he'd spent it protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. I looked directly at Derek when I said the next part. "Some people measure success by bank account balances or job titles or social status. But I measure it by a different standard. How many lives did you improve? How many people are better off because you existed? How much good did you put into the world?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge. Corporal Chen improved thousands of lives. Every road we cleared, every explosive device we disabled, every convoy that made it safely to its destination, that represented real people going home to their families instead of coming home in coffins. Pastor Williams was nodding from his seat behind the altar. Several congregation members had tears in their eyes. "I'm not asking anyone to join the military. I'm not saying everyone needs to risk their life for others. But I am saying this. Real service means putting something bigger than yourself first. It means measuring your worth by how much you give rather than how much you take." I paused, letting the words settle over the congregation. Yesterday, my family told me that my military service was worthless, that my current work helping veterans and their families is a waste of time, that I need to grow up and get a real job that matters. I could see Mom's face going pale. Dad was staring at his hands. But Michael Chen mattered. The roads we cleared mattered. The families we're helping now matter, and tomorrow, when I go to Chen's memorial service, I'll be surrounded by hundreds of people who understand that some things are more important than profit margins and social status. The sanctuary was absolutely silent. Even the sounds from the street outside seemed to have stopped. I want to close with something my squad leader once told me. The true measure of a person isn't what they accomplish for themselves. It's what they're willing to sacrifice for others. Michael Chen understood that. Every Marine I served with understood that. And I hope that someday, everyone will understand that. I stepped away from the pulpit and walked back toward my seat, but I didn't make it there. Because something was happening at the back of the church that made everyone turn around. 3 figures in dress blue uniforms were standing in the doorway, their brass buttons gleaming in the morning light. United States Marines, standing at IK. Perfect attention, waiting for permission to enter. The sight of those uniforms in that sacred space sent chills down my spine. But what happened next would change everything my family thought they knew about my service, and about me. Pastor Williams rose from his chair and walked toward the back of the church, his expression solemn but welcoming. The 3 Marines remained at attention until he reached them. "Please, come in," he said quietly, but his voice carried across the silent sanctuary. "How can we help you?" The lead Marine, a staff sergeant with ribbons covering the left side of his chest, stepped forward. "Sir, we're looking for Staff Sergeant Jessica Sullivan. We understand she might be here." Every head in the congregation turned toward me. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. "I'm Jessica Sullivan." The three Marines moved down the center aisle in perfect formation. Their dress blue uniforms were immaculate, pressed to crisp perfection, brass polished to a mirror shine, every detail regulation perfect. The sound of their synchronized footsteps echoed off the stone walls. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," the lead Marine said as they stopped directly in front of my pew. "I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. This is Sergeant Barnes and Corporal Mitchell. We've come from Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Great Lakes." I recognized the name Rodriguez immediately. He'd been Chen's best friend since boot camp, the one who'd stood beside Chen during his Eagle, Globe, and Anchor ceremony 4 years ago. "Rodriguez," I whispered, "how did you find me?" "Ma'am, Corporal Chen's family asked us to locate you. They wanted to deliver something personally." The congregation watched in absolute silence as Sergeant Barnes stepped forward carrying a wooden presentation case, the kind used for flag presentations at military funerals. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," Rodriguez continued, "Corporal Chen left specific instructions in his personal effects. In the event of his death, he wanted you to receive this." Barnes opened the case. Inside was Chen's Bronze Star Medal. The same decoration I'd earned, but one that meant infinitely more coming from him. Beneath the medal was a folded letter with my name written in Chen's careful handwriting. "He also wanted us to read this aloud," Rodriguez said, taking the letter from the case. "He felt it was important that people understand what your leadership meant to the Marines who served under you." My knees went weak. I gripped the back of the pew in front of me to stay upright. Rodriguez unfolded the letter and began to read. In a voice that carried to every corner of the church, "To Staff Sergeant Jessica Sullivan, the finest leader I ever served under. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it home, but I wanted you to know that serving with you was the greatest honor of my life." The words hit me like a physical force. Behind me, I could hear people shifting in their seats, but nobody spoke. Staff Sergeant Sullivan taught me that being a Marine isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing your job anyway, because other people are counting on you. She taught me that real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's perfect performance in spite of terror. Rodriguez paused, looking up from the letter to meet my eyes before continuing. "During our second deployment, Staff Sergeant Sullivan personally saved my life and the lives of 6 other Marines during an ambush outside Kandahar. When our convoy hit an IED and came under heavy fire, she exposed herself to enemy gunfire to reach our position and coordinate our extraction. She carried Private Morrison, who'd been wounded by shrapnel, 300 meters to safety, while bullets were flying over our heads. I had never told my family about that day. I'd never told anyone outside the military about that day. Staff Sergeant Sullivan received no recognition for her actions that day because the mission was classified. But every Marine in that convoy knows that we came home because of her courage, her quick thinking, and her refusal to leave anyone behind. The silence in the church was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. She told us that Marines take care of Marines, and she lived that creed every single day. When I was struggling with anxiety after our first deployment, Staff Sergeant Sullivan spent hours helping me work through it. When Private Garcia got news that his wife was leaving, Staff Sergeant Sullivan helped him get emergency leave and provided support that saved his marriage. When Corporal Jones was considering suicide after losing his squad mate, Staff Sergeant Sullivan sat with him all night and made sure he got the help he needed. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't move to wipe them away. "People ask me what makes a good leader," Rodriguez read, his own voice beginning to waver. "The answer is simple. Someone who cares more about their people than themselves. Someone who takes responsibility when things go wrong and gives credit when things go right. Someone who leads by example rather than by command." Staff Sergeant Sullivan was all of these things. The congregation was completely transfixed. I could see women dabbing their eyes with tissues, men sitting straighter in their seats. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, you taught me that service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about doing what's right when nobody's watching. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's about making sacrifices that nobody will ever know about, because that's what the mission requires. Rodriguez looked up from the letter again, scanning the faces in the congregation before focusing back on me. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that you made me a better Marine and a better man. I want people to understand that leaders like you are why America can sleep safely at night. And I want you to never forget that every life you saved, every road you cleared, every bomb you disabled made the world a safer place. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the presentation case. The letter is signed. With eternal gratitude and respect, Corporal Michael Chen, United States Marine Corps. The silence that followed was broken only by quiet sobbing from various parts of the congregation. I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by Chen's words and the realization that someone had truly understood what we'd all been trying to accomplish. But Sergeant Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Ma'am, there's one more thing." Corporal Chen's family asked us to read a message from them as well. Corporal Mitchell stepped forward with a second letter. "This is from Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Rodriguez announced. "They wanted to speak directly to Staff Sergeant Sullivan in front of everyone here today." Mitchell began to read. "Dear Jessica, our son Michael wrote about you constantly in his letters home. He described you as the bravest person he'd ever met, the leader who taught him what honor really meant. When we received news of his death, the Marine who came to our door told us that Michael died exactly as he lived, trying to save others." The letter continued. "We want everyone here to know that our son considered serving under you to be the defining experience of his life. He told us that you turned a group of scared young Marines into a family, that you never asked anyone to do anything you wouldn't do yourself, that you brought every single member of your unit home alive from 2 deployments. I hadn't known that Chen had written to his parents about me. I'd had no idea that our relationship had meant so much to him. We also want people to know," Mitchell continued reading, "that Jessica Sullivan embodies everything we hope our son learned during his service. After Michael's death, she called us personally. She spent 2 hours on the phone sharing stories about Michael that we'd never heard. She told us about his courage, his kindness, his technical brilliance. She made sure we understood that our son died as a hero. That phone call had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Calling Chen's parents to express my condolences, to share memories of their son, to help them understand that his death had meaning. We researched Staff Sergeant Sullivan after that phone call." The letter continued. "We learned that she earned a Bronze Star for valor during combat operations. We learned that she was recommended for promotion twice, but declined both times because she wanted to stay with her team rather than advance her own career. We learned that every Marine who served under her speaks of her with the kind of respect reserved for truly exceptional leaders." The congregation was hanging on every word. I could see people throughout the sanctuary wiping away tears. "Most importantly," Mitchell read, "we learned that Jessica Sullivan left the military and took a job helping other veterans and their families transition to civilian life. She chose service over salary, meaning over money, purpose over prestige. She embodies everything our son believed the Marine Corps represented." Rodriguez stepped forward again. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, on behalf of Corporal Chen's family, and on behalf of every Marine who's ever served under your command, we want to present you with this." Mitchell opened a third case, revealing a plaque that took my breath away. It was a beautiful wooden display featuring the Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor emblem, with an engraved brass plate that read, "Presented to Staff Sergeant Jessica Sullivan, United States Marine Corps, in recognition of exceptional leadership, courage under fire, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of Marines under her command. From the Marines of 2nd Combat Engineer Battalion, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. But what made me gasp was what surrounded the main plaque. Smaller brass plates with names and signatures, dozens of them. Every Marine I'd ever served with had somehow contributed to this presentation. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said formally, "these are the signatures of every Marine who served in your units during both deployments. They wanted you to know that your leadership saved lives and that your service honored the Corps." The 3 Marines stepped back and rendered a perfect salute, the kind of crisp, respectful salute reserved for the most honored members of the military community. I returned their salute with trembling hands, fighting to maintain my composure in front of the entire congregation. When we dropped our salutes, Rodriguez spoke one final time. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, Corporal Chen's final request was that we remind you of something you told him during his first week in country. Marines don't serve for the recognition. We serve because it's right. He wanted you to know that every life you touched, every Marine you led, every family you've helped since coming home, all of it matters. All of it has meaning." The 3 Marines executed a perfect about-face and began marching toward the exit. But before they reached the doors, Rodriguez stopped and turned back to address the congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a voice that commanded absolute attention, "you have a genuine American hero sitting among you. Staff Sergeant Sullivan is the kind of Marine that legends are made of. We are honored to have served with her." With that, they left, leaving the congregation in stunned silence and me standing at the front of the church, holding a Bronze Star medal and a plaque that represented everything I'd thought was lost forever. The church doors closed behind the 3 Marines with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through time itself. I stood at the front of the sanctuary, still holding Chen's Bronze Star and the plaque from my fellow Marines, while 300 people stared at me in complete silence. Pastor Williams approached slowly, his face filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. When he reached me, he placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Jessica," he said, his voice carrying across the sanctuary, "on behalf of this congregation, thank you. Thank you for your service, your sacrifice, and for reminding us what true heroism looks like." The applause started softly from the back, rose, tentative clapping from elderly veterans who understood what they'd just witnessed. But it grew steadily, washing over the sanctuary like a wave, until every person in that church was standing and clapping with genuine reverence. Every person except my family, Mom. Dad, Derek, and Madison remained seated in their 3rd-row pew, looking like they'd been turned to stone. Derek's face had gone completely white. Madison was staring at her hands. Mom was looking around frantically, as if searching for an escape route. The applause continued for several minutes before Pastor Williams raised his hands for quiet. "Let us pray for all those who serve, who have served, and who have given their lives in service to others. And let us pray that we never forget the debt we owe to people like Staff Sergeant Sullivan and Corporal Chen." After the benediction, people began approaching me. Not the polite, obligatory conversation of social events, but genuine expressions of gratitude and respect. An elderly man named Harold Peterson introduced himself as a Korean War veteran. 60 years I've been attending this church," he said with tears in his eyes. "And I've never heard anything that moved me more than what you shared today. Thank you for carrying on the tradition of service." A middle-aged woman named Carol Martinez told me her nephew was currently deployed with the Army. "I'm going to call him tonight and tell him about you," she said. "He needs to know there are people like you who understand what he's going through." Sarah Thompson, a teacher at the local elementary school, asked if I'd be willing to speak to her students about service and sacrifice. "They need to hear from someone like you," she explained. "Someone who can help them understand that there are people willing to fight for their freedom." For 20 minutes, I was surrounded by congregation members who wanted to shake my hand, share their own military connections, or simply express their gratitude. It was the first time since coming home that I felt truly appreciated for my service. But through it all, my family remained in their seats, watching from a distance like observers at a zoo. Finally, when the crowd around me began to thin, Derek stood up. He walked toward me slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached me, he stood there for several seconds without speaking. "Jess," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. No idea about what, Derek? About any of it. The Bronze Star, the lives you saved, He gestured helplessly toward the plaque I was still holding. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Why hadn't I told them? Because every time I'd tried to explain what my service meant, they'd dismissed it. Because every time I'd attempted to share what I'd experienced, they'd changed the subject to Derek's achievements. Because I'd learned that my family didn't want to hear about sacrifice. They wanted to hear about success. "Would you have listened?" I asked simply. Derek opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He knew the answer. Mom approached. Next, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Jessica, sweetheart, I don't understand why you never explained things properly." "Explained what properly, Mom?" "Well, you know, the important parts. The medals, the heroic actions. You always made it sound so ordinary." Ordinary. She thought saving lives was ordinary because I hadn't presented it with the drama and self-promotion she was accustomed to. "Mom, I tried to tell you about my deployments dozens of times. You always said you didn't want to hear about war stories. You said it was too depressing." "Well, yes, but..." She struggled to find words. "If we'd known you were actually important over there..." Actually important. As if the lives I'd saved only mattered if they came with public recognition. Dad joined our small circle, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Jessica, I owe you an apology. We all do. We didn't understand." "Understand what, Dad?" "That you were actually doing something meaningful. That your service was real." Real. After all this time, after everything that had happened, he was finally acknowledging that my service was real. But Madison's reaction was the most telling. She stayed several steps back, looking uncomfortable and out of place. When Derek motioned for her to join us, she shook her head and whispered something about needing air. "Madison doesn't really understand military stuff," Derek said apologetically. "It's just not her world." "It's not your world either," I pointed out. "But that didn't stop you from having opinions about it." The congregation was slowly filing out, but many people lingered, still processing what they'd witnessed. Pastor Williams approached our family group, his expression gentle but firm. "I hope you all understand what a remarkable woman you have in your family," he said directly to my parents. "What we witnessed here today, that kind of respect from fellow Marines, that's not something that's given lightly. That comes from extraordinary service and leadership." Mom nodded rapidly, eager to appear supportive now that the truth was public. "Oh yes, we're very proud of Jessica. We always have been." The lie was so blatant, so completely contradicted by years of dismissal and mockery, that I actually laughed out loud. "Mom, stop. Please just stop." "Stop what, dear?" "Pretending you supported my service. Pretending you understood what I was doing. Pretending you were proud when you've spent 4 years telling me to get a real job." The remaining congregation, members were pretending not to listen, but I could see them glancing our way. "Jessica," Dad said quietly, "maybe we should discuss this at home." "No, Dad. We're going to discuss it right here, right now. Because for the first time in my life, I'm standing in a room full of people who actually understand what service means." I turned to face my entire family, Mom, Dad, Derek, and Madison, who'd reluctantly rejoined our group. For 4 years, you've treated my military service like an embarrassing phase. You've called it playing army, going on adventures, wasting time. You've told me to get a real job, to stop living in the past, to grow up and join the real world. Derek started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. You measured my worth by my salary instead of my contributions. You were embarrassed to tell your friends what I did for a living. You excluded me from family celebrations because my lifestyle didn't fit your image. The words were coming out faster now, 4 years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Derek, you told me yesterday that I was stuck in a fantasy about being important. You said I was pretending my military service mattered. But those 3 Marines didn't drive here from Great Lakes to honor a fantasy. Chen didn't leave me his Bronze Star because he was confused about reality. I held up the plaque, making sure they could all see the dozens of signatures. Every name on this plaque represents a Marine whose life was changed by serving together. These aren't people who were confused about my value. These are people who trusted me with their lives and went home safe because of decisions I made under fire. Madison looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. Mom was crying quietly, though whether from shame or genuine emotion I couldn't tell. But here's what's really heartbreaking, I continued. I spent so much time trying to earn your respect, trying to make you proud, trying to prove that my choices had value. I wasted years feeling ashamed of the best thing I'd ever done because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally made me feel like I was worthless. Dad stepped forward. Jessica, we never said you were worthless. You didn't have to say it, Dad. You showed it. Every time you changed the subject when I talked about my deployments. Every time you compared my choices unfavorably to Derek's. Every time you introduced me to people without mentioning my military service because you were embarrassed by it. The truth was settling over all of us like a heavy blanket. I came home from war zones where I saved actual lives, and you treated me like a failure because I didn't make enough money. I earned decorations for valor, and you acted like they were participation trophies. I dedicated my life to serving others, and you called it a waste of time. Pastor Williams had been listening quietly, but now he stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, Derek, Madison, I've been ministering to families for over 30 years. I've seen what happens when we measure people by the wrong standards, when we value wealth over worth, prestige over purpose, status over service. He gestured toward me. Your daughter represents everything our faith teaches about selfless service. She's living proof that there are still people willing to sacrifice everything for others. Instead of celebrating that, you've spent years trying to convince her it was wrong. The weight of recognition was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt valued for who I truly was rather than criticized for who I wasn't. Jessica, Derek said finally, I need to apologize. Not just for yesterday, but for everything. I never understood what you went through, what you accomplished. I judged something I knew nothing about. It was a start, but words were easy. Actions would tell the real story. Derek, I don't need you to understand my service. I need you to respect it. I need you to stop treating it like a phase I went through or a mistake I made. I will. I promise. Mom stepped forward tentatively. Sweetheart, how can we? How can we make this right? By treating my work with veterans' families as seriously as you treat Derek's insurance sales. By acknowledging that meaning matters more than money. By understanding that I chose a path of service because it aligned with my values, not because I couldn't do anything else. We stood there in the shadow of the stained glass windows, 4 family members finally seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken 3 Marines appearing in a church, reading letters from a fallen comrade, to make my own family understand what I'd been trying to tell them for years. But as I looked down at Chen's Bronze Star in my hands, I realized something profound. Their understanding, while meaningful, was no longer necessary for my sense of worth. I'd found my value in the eyes of the people who mattered most. The Marines I'd served with, the families I was helping, the community I was building. Their mockery had hurt, but it hadn't defined me. Their approval would be nice, but it wouldn't complete me. I was already complete. I had been all along. The Sullivan family walked out of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church that day as different people than we'd walked in. Some transformations happen gradually over years. Others happen in a single moment when truth becomes impossible to ignore. This was our moment of truth, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who needed to change. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.